Hello folks, welcome to Redoubt Productions again. My name is Spencer Frogner, and we're actually on the site of a small battlefield. Now, here in Western Pennsylvania, you know, French and Indian War. The main sites you're going to hear about are going to be Fort Pitt, which is now Point State Park in the city of Pittsburgh. You're going to hear about Fort Ligonier, which is just about roughly 3 miles to the west of us from here. You're going to hear about the Fort Necessity National Battlefield and Braddock's defeat, which is now the community of Braddock, Pennsylvania. But there are many smaller skirmishes occurring in this area. The French and Indian War was not big, massive battles like Gettysburg in the American Civil War. Most of the fighting out here would be ambush style, try to destroy as much of the enemy as possible, as quickly as possible, and take as much of their supply as possible. Now, back in 1758, the British had constructed Forbes's Road from Philadelphia to Pittsburgh. This road came about 300 miles across the southern half of Pennsylvania. This was the first successful military highway to reach the forks of the Ohio. A couple years prior, they'd attempted with Braddock's Road, Braddock's defeat. We all know how that ended up. In 1758, John Forbes' army succeeded. They built a series of 4 fortifications across Pennsylvania to hold this new military highway. The nearest fort being, as I mentioned earlier, Ligonier. Now, in 1759, although the French had lost the point in 1758, they had hoped 1759 would be a year of return to this region. They were already beginning to make plans. They already gathered units. We estimated probably anywhere from about 700 to 1,000 soldiers in June of 1759 were encamped at Fort Presque Isle, awaiting the order to move down here into western Pennsylvania. The idea was going to be they were going to cut off the Forbes Road here at the Laurel Ridge, and then they were going to take Fort Ligonier and then pretty much besiege Fort Pitt. Now, before they can conduct this, they had to pretty much fill out the region, fill out what's the current military presence. At that time, you had about 300 to 400 men at Fort Pitt. You had about 200 to 300 men at Ligonier. They sent a team of 40 to 50 natives that were under command of Ensign Blinn. They came down from Fort McCall, which would later become Venango, Pennsylvania. They came down in this region in mid-May, started scouting out the region. We know a couple counts where they attacked a couple convoys, killed a soldier, scalped someone, putting the area in this region on notice. Now, one of them convoys going from Fort Bedford to Fort Ligonier would have been under command of Thomas Bullitt. Bullitt had been a veteran of the French and Indian War. He's now leading a convoy from Bedford. They have about a team of 100 to 110 soldiers. Most of these are most likely colonial soldiers, Pennsylvanians, Virginians, guarding a convoy of about 15 wagons that are including bacon and pork that's going to be given to Fort Pitt and Fort Ligonier. Now, on May 23rd, I know the marker is wrong. I'm calling it out Pennsylvania Historical Museum Collection. That date's wrong. On May 23rd, 1759, Bullitt's 100-man force were coming down through here and were ambushed by Blinn's 40 natives. Now, it's pretty vague on what happened. I was able to roughly find two to three accounts directly from the British, and I found 2 accounts later on in history from the French. Basically, this is my amalgamation of the accounts. Bullitt comes down, gets ambushed, they leave the wagons, go onto the southern side of the road to take up defensive positions, and most of this area would have been wooded, but there is the chance that there probably was a small clearing in this region, which makes sense why this skirmish occurred here. They would set up in roughly what is now the clearing, and Bullitt's men would make, in a span of 15 minutes, 3 attempts to try to retake their convoy. They soon realized it was hopeless. They felt they were surrounded. And that's a very common case you're going to find in French and Indian War battles. The British are often going to feel they're outnumbered, surrounded. And in fact, you're going to hear numbers later on about 200 to 300 natives attacking Bullitt's force. We know today it was probably only about 50. It's very similar occurred a year prior at the Battle of Fort Ligonier on October 12th. They thought they had about 2,000 French and natives down upon them. It was only about 600. It's because the native forces were so well versed on fighting out here in the frontier, moving back and forth, they can make their numbers seem much larger than they actually were. Bullitt's party retreated, and about 15 minutes later, the rest of the convoy retreated to Ligonier, leaving our wagons here on the road. We're just a mile west of where we were earlier, Bullitt's defeat. Roughly around here, the whole road here is labeled Old Forbes Road because it is actually an original trace of the Forbes Road that you could traverse. So if anybody does visit Fort Ligonier or anywhere in the area, look for something fun to do. It's free. Just take a little drive on an original trace of Forbes Road. There's a marker just over my shoulder over here that marks one of the various granite markers you'll see along US 30 and trace of the Old Forbes Road marking its designation. Now, after Bullitt was defeated, his troops retired back to Fort Ligonier. We estimate they lost about anywhere from 15 to 20 killed. Anywhere about 15 to 20 were killed. Another 20 wounded or captured. About 40 casualties were estimated. We do know reports in June of that year at Fort Niagara there were Native troops with scalps that came from Royal Hanning, which is another term for Fort Ligonier. So it was not necessarily a massive engagement, it was definitely a small, bloody, bitter engagement that occurred just over the hill over there. Now when they retreat back to Ligonier, Thomas Lloyd, who's the commander of the post at the time, would gather all the officers together, debate what they're going to do, and they end up deciding initially that they're going to hold out the fort. They feel there are more Native forces out there than what we know today. They thought it was about 200. We know it was probably about 50 today. Then 5 minutes later, they reverse that decision, realizing, yeah, we probably shouldn't just leave those wagons out there to be unattained. So they go back out to try to fight off the natives. By that point, Blynn's native contingency had left, gone somewhere in the woods, and left behind a burning trail of wagons. The 15 wagons had been torched. The French did not have the means of hauling it all the way back to Venango. The British now have to go from fighting to being a bucket brigade to douse the flames. 5 of the wagons were lost, but fortunately, most of the supplies were preserved, those supplies being salted pork and bacon that were supposed to supply Fort Ligonier's storehouses. The French will report that Bullitt's defeat was a resounding success. In reality, though, it was an isolated situation of a grander picture. In June of that year, the British are going to besiege Fort Niagara, which is a critical juncture for the French. That is the last nailhead holding their western territories together to the Providence, Quebec. If they lose Niagara, their territories are split in two. So instead of attacking Fort Pitt, they have to abort that operation and send those troops running back to Niagara. This relief column of French and natives will be attacked by British and their own native allies in July at the Battle of La Famille Belleau. I am probably pronouncing it wrong. It'll be in the description below, folks. I'm not good with French. My apologies. The French relief column that was originally meant to attack Ligonier and Pitt were destroyed at that engagement. And that was the last attempt by the French to recapture Western Pennsylvania. By 1763, the French will have lost their territories in this region of North America, and this will now be British, officially British colonies. About a decade or so later, the American Revolution will begin as a result of the taxes to recuperate the economic losses the British had in funding this war. I'd like to thank you for watching. If you want to see any more videos, be sure to hit the subscribe button down below. We do tours like this. We're right here in Western Pennsylvania. Me and my cameraman work at a French Indian War site, so we are very well versed with various French Indian War information and other military engagements as well. You'll see a tour down below of the Battle of Braddock's defeat. You'll see a tour of a Civil War engagement occurred just outside of Cumberland, Maryland. If any of that interests you, be sure to subscribe to our channel. Thank you for watching, and we'll be seeing you in the next video.
We have just discovered an original board that likely would have been carried on one of the wagons to build Fort Ligonier. They would have brought this on the wagon to build the fort with, and we just happened to come across it.
We're going to sell it on eBay for $500.
Yeah. We're going to start bids at $6,000 for this board, so be sure to check that out.